England in the 16th century, a land of contrasts, where the old world met the new, and traditions clashed with innovations. The streets were bustling with life, filled with merchants, craftsmen, and common folk, all contributing to the vibrant tapestry of Tudor society. A kingdom on the cusp of change. The Renaissance was sweeping across Europe, bringing with it new ideas, art, and science. England was no exception, as it began to transform under the influence of these revolutionary concepts. At its heart, a young king, Henry VIII. Ascending to the throne at just 17, he was full of promise and ambition, eager to leave his mark on history. He was a magnificent figure. Tall and athletic, Henry was the epitome of a Renaissance prince. His prowess in hunting and jousting was legendary, and he took great pride in his physical abilities. His booming laugh echoed in the halls of Hampton Court Palace. The palace itself was a symbol of his grandeur, a testament to his desire to create a legacy that would endure through the ages. He was a man of contradictions, a king who sought divine guidance yet often acted with ruthless pragmatism. His faith was unwavering, but his actions were sometimes at odds with his beliefs. A devout Catholic, yet he challenged the very foundation of the Church. His desire for an annulment from Catherine of Aragon led to a seismic shift in religious power, forever altering the course of English history. He craved love and affection, but his pursuit of it would leave a trail of broken hearts and severed heads. 6 marriages, each more unstable and chaotic than the last, marked his reign with personal and political turmoil. Henry's reign was a time of immense change. The landscape of England was evolving, shaped by the aftermath of the War of the Roses and the dawn of a new era. England was still reeling from the War of the Roses. The conflict had left deep scars, both physically and emotionally, on the nation and its people. The scars of conflict ran deep. Families were torn apart, and the land bore the marks of battles fought and lives lost. Yet amidst the recovery, there was a sense of hope and renewal. But Henry was determined to heal his kingdom. He sought to bring stability and prosperity, implementing reforms that would strengthen the monarchy and the nation. He yearned for a son, an heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. This longing drove many of his decisions, influencing his marriages and his policies. This desire for a male heir would become an obsession. It led to the downfall of queens and the rise of new ones, each hoping to provide the king with the son he so desperately wanted. It would drive him to commit acts of unimaginable cruelty. Executions, imprisonments, and betrayals became the tools of his reign, as he sought to secure his legacy at any cost. Fear was a constant companion in his court. His temper was legendary. Courtiers walked on eggshells, knowing that a single misstep could lead to their downfall. One wrong word, one perceived slight, could mean imprisonment or even death. The dungeons of the Tower of London were filled with those who had fallen out of favor. Yet amidst the fear, there was also admiration. Henry's charisma and leadership inspired loyalty and respect among his subjects. Henry was a charismatic leader. His presence commanded attention, and his vision for England's future was compelling. He was a patron of the arts and a skilled warrior. His court was a center of culture and learning, attracting the brightest minds of the age. He embodied the ideal of a Renaissance prince, a ruler who valued knowledge, strength, and the finer things in life. The court was a whirlwind of intrigue and ambition. Nobles and courtiers schemed and plotted, each seeking to gain the king's favor and advance their own positions. Nobles vied for the king's trust with displays of loyalty and fear, all in a desperate attempt to appease him and reap the rewards of serving the most powerful man in the world. The stakes were high, and the rewards for loyalty and service could be immense. Whispers of plots and betrayals filled the air. The court was a dangerous place, where alliances were fragile and trust was a rare commodity. At the center of it all stood Henry. His decisions shaped the destiny of the nation, and his presence was felt in every corner of the court. He was the sun around which everything else revolved. His influence was absolute, and his will was law. He was the lion in winter, his roar echoing through the ages. Even in his later years, his presence was formidable, and his legacy continues to shape the history of England. Thomas More was a man of unwavering faith. His devotion to his beliefs was evident in every aspect of his life, from his scholarly pursuits to his public service. More's faith was not just a private matter, it was the cornerstone of his identity and his actions. He was a scholar, a humanist, and a devout Catholic. His intellectual pursuits were vast, encompassing theology, philosophy, and law. More's writings, such as Utopia, reflect his deep thinking and his vision for a just society. He believed in the sanctity of the church. For More, the church was not just an institution, but a divine entity that guided the moral compass of society. His reverence for the church's teachings was unwavering. He served Henry faithfully as his chancellor. In this role, More was a trusted advisor, navigating the complex political landscape of Tudor England. His loyalty to the king was matched only by his loyalty to his conscience. But their friendship would be tested to its limits. The bond between More and Henry, once strong and unbreakable, began to fray under the weight of political and personal conflicts. Henry's desire to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon put More in an impossible position. As a man of principle, he could not support the king's wish to divorce his wife, a decision that went against the teachings of the church. More was quoted saying,
"I am the king's true faithful subject and daily beadsman, and I do pray for him and all his realm. But I cannot agree to take an oath that directly goes against my conscience."
Henry, wearied by years without a male heir, demanded a divorce. Henry's desperation for a son to secure his dynasty led him to seek drastic measures that More could not, in good conscience, endorse. Henry believed his marriage to Catherine was cursed. This belief, fueled by his lack of a male heir, drove him to question the validity of his marriage and seek a new union that he hoped would bring him the son he so desperately desired. Catherine had failed to produce a surviving son. Despite their many years of marriage, Catherine's inability to provide a male heir was seen as a failure, both personally and politically, by Henry. Henry sought solace in the arms of Anne Boleyn, a woman of sharp wit and even sharper ambition. Anne's allure and promise of a new beginning captivated Henry, offering him hope for the future. Anne was everything Catherine was not: young, vibrant, and alluring. Her presence at court was a stark contrast to Catherine's, and she quickly became the center of Henry's affections and ambitions. More, a man of principle, could not condone the king's actions. His moral and religious convictions made it impossible for him to support Henry's desire to break from the church and marry Anne. He refused to swear the oath recognizing Henry as the supreme head of the Church of England. This act of defiance was not just a political statement, but a profound expression of More's faith and integrity. This act of defiance was seen as treason. In the eyes of the king and his supporters, More's refusal was a direct challenge to Henry's authority and the new order he sought to establish. More was imprisoned in the Tower of London. The once respected scholar and statesman found himself confined within the cold, unforgiving walls of the Tower, a stark contrast to his former life of intellectual pursuit and public service. His world, once filled with books and lively debate, was now confined to cold stone walls. The isolation and harsh conditions of his imprisonment were a severe test of his resolve and faith. More's imprisonment sent shockwaves through the court. The news of his arrest and confinement spread quickly, causing a ripple of fear and uncertainty among those who had once respected and admired him. His refusal to bend to the king's will was a testament to his unwavering faith. Even in the face of death, he held firm to his principles, believing that his actions would be vindicated in the eyes of God. In his prison writings, he was quoted saying,
"I do not care very much what men say of me, provided that God approves of me. I trust I shall shortly after meet with the mercy of God in the everlasting kingdom of heaven. I die the king's good servant, but God's first."
Here he was, a man who had been a close friend to the king. Their relationship, once built on mutual respect and trust, had deteriorated to the point where he was now seen as a threat to his reign. Now, he was a prisoner of conscience. His refusal to compromise his beliefs had led to his downfall, but he remained steadfast in his conviction that he was doing what was right. But it was a faith that would cost him his life. His execution was the ultimate price he paid for his beliefs, a sacrifice that he hoped would inspire others to stand firm in their convictions, no matter the cost. Anne Boleyn's rise was as meteoric as her fall was tragic. She was a woman ahead of her time, intelligent, ambitious, and fiercely independent. She captivated Henry's heart. He showered her with gifts and attention. He defied the Pope and the Catholic world to make her his queen. Their wedding was a hastily arranged affair. The whispers of scandal followed them. She was crowned queen in a lavish ceremony, but her triumph was short-lived. The pressure to produce a male heir weighed heavily on her. She suffered miscarriages, each one a blow to her hopes and a threat to her position. Henry, frustrated by the lack of a male heir, turned on Anne with a vengeance. Her enemies, sensing weakness, whispered poison in the king's ear. Accusations of adultery and treason were leveled against her. A show trial, orchestrated by Henry's advisors, sealed her fate. Her words spoken from prison were profound. She is quoted, saying,
"Never hath prince had wife more loyal in all duty, and in all true affection, than you have ever found in Anne Boleyn. I am entirely innocent of all these accusations, so that I cannot confess to them. I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. I have come here to die, according to law, and thus yield myself humbly to the will of the king."
The same walls that had held Thomas More now confined her. She faced her accusers with dignity. She proclaimed her innocence, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Anne said to her ladies-in-waiting, whilst moments away from death,
"The executioner is, I hear, very good, and I have but a little neck."
This statement shows her dark wit and composure even in the face of death. Anne Boleyn, the woman who had captivated a king, was beheaded on the Tower Green. With Anne Boleyn gone, Henry turned his attention to consolidating his power. The court was in turmoil, and he needed to assert his authority more than ever. The execution of Anne was a clear message to all who dared to defy him. But it was not enough. He needed to ensure that his reign was unchallenged and that his legacy would be unassailable. Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church. This was not a decision made lightly, but one driven by necessity and ambition. The Pope's refusal to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon had left him with no choice. He needed to secure his dynasty and ensure that his heirs would inherit a stable and unified kingdom. Henry declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. This bold move allowed him to control religious doctrine and practice within his realm. It was a declaration of independence from Rome and a statement of his absolute authority. No longer would the English crown be subservient to the whims of a distant pope. Monasteries, once places of piety and learning, became targets. These institutions had long been bastions of the Catholic faith, and their wealth and influence posed a threat to Henry's new order. The monks and nuns who resided within their walls were loyal to Rome, not to him. Henry, driven by greed and a desire to break the Church's hold on England, ordered their dissolution. This was a calculated move to strip the Church of its power and to fill the royal coffers with the vast wealth accumulated by the monasteries over centuries. The dissolution was swift and ruthless. The impact on England was profound. The monasteries had been integral to the social and economic fabric of the country. Their dissolution disrupted communities and left many without the support they had relied on for generations. The landscape of England was forever changed. Monasteries for centuries had been centers of charity and education. They provided alms to the poor, cared for the sick, and offered education to those who could not afford it. Their libraries housed invaluable manuscripts, and their scriptoriums were centers of learning and culture. Their closure left a void in the lives of ordinary people. The loss of these institutions meant the loss of vital services and support. Communities that had once thrived around the monasteries now faced hardship and uncertainty. The social fabric of England was torn apart. The poor lost a vital source of support. The alms and charity provided by the monasteries had been a lifeline for many. Without this support, the most vulnerable in society were left to fend for themselves. Poverty and destitution became more widespread. The sick were left to fend for themselves. Monastic infirmaries had been places of care and healing. With their closure, those who were ill or infirm had nowhere to turn. The dissolution of the monasteries created a healthcare crisis that affected countless lives. The king's coffers, however, swelled with the wealth confiscated from the monasteries. This newfound wealth allowed Henry to fund his ambitions and secure his power. The riches of the church were now at his disposal, and he used them to strengthen his reign. Henry used this newfound wealth to bolster his own power. He built palaces. He raised armies. The grandeur of his constructions was a testament to his authority and ambition. These palaces were not just homes, they were symbols of his dominance and the new order he had established. He engaged in costly wars. These conflicts were not just about territorial expansion, they were about asserting his power and securing his legacy. The wealth from the monasteries funded these campaigns, allowing him to project his influence far beyond the borders of England. The dissolution of the monasteries marked a turning point in English history. It was a moment of profound change that reshaped the religious, social, and economic landscape of the country. The ruins of these once great institutions stood as silent witnesses to this transformation. It was a decisive break from Rome. The dissolution of the monasteries was not just an act of destruction, it was a declaration of independence. England was no longer under the spiritual authority of the Pope. The country was now free to chart its own religious course. It paved the way for the establishment of the Church of England. This new church, under the control of the monarchy, represented a break from centuries of tradition. It was a bold and radical move that would have lasting implications for the future of England, but it came at a cost. The dissolution of the monasteries was a violent and disruptive process. It left scars on the landscape and on the lives of those who had depended on these institutions. The price of religious reform was high, and its consequences were felt for generations. Thomas Cromwell was a man of humble origins. He rose through the ranks to become Henry's chief minister. He was a ruthless and efficient administrator. He was the architect of the English Reformation. He oversaw the dissolution of the monasteries. He consolidated the king's power.
I understood the levers of power. I knew how to play the courtly game. I secured alliances. I crushed my enemies. I was Henry's right-hand man. I was the power behind the throne.
But Cromwell's star, like those before him, would eventually fall. He made a fatal miscalculation. He arranged Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves. In 1539, Thomas Cromwell, ever the master strategist, sought to secure England's future through an alliance with the Duchy of Cleves. To ensure the king's approval, Cromwell commissioned Hans Holbein the Younger, the most renowned portrait artist of the time, to capture Anne of Cleves. Holbein's brush presented her as a dignified and graceful figure, a portrait of diplomacy and beauty. But when Anne arrived in England, reality did not meet the king's expectations. Henry, famously displeased, uttered the damning words, "I like her not." What Holbein had portrayed with elegance, Henry saw as deception. The marriage was doomed from the start. What should have been a triumph for Cromwell quickly unraveled. The king's fury was swift, and blame fell squarely on his most trusted minister. The portrait that had once promised unity now marked the beginning of Cromwell's downfall, yet another victim of the king's wrath. He blamed Cromwell for the disastrous match. Cromwell's enemies, sensing an opportunity, moved against him. He was arrested on charges of treason and heresy. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London. He was stripped of his power. He was executed on Tower Hill. The man who had once been the most powerful man in England was now just another victim of the king's wrath. And so we've explored just a fragment of Henry VIII's more controversial decisions, a reign filled with ambition, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of power. Each choice left an indelible mark on history, shaping the world in ways both glorious and tragic. If you enjoyed this glimpse into history, don't forget to like and subscribe to help the channel grow. There's so much more to uncover in the tales of kings, queens, and the intrigues of the past. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.